I am delighted to be back here with Ed Forrest of Educate for Life. If you're watching the first half of this, you'll notice that we've changed location. We were in the British Library, where I'm a partner, life and business coach. We were talking a little bit about your journey and the work that you're doing, founder of Educate for Life, which is a school based in India and having an impact on the whole community. And I was fascinated by your story and your journey, and we're beginning to really explore what education's about, and I'm curious to know about what your own education was like. I was struck by what I think one of the things that you said was that you realised that when you were travelling, that you could actually have a huge impact with the money that you instead of travelling, you could actually do something with it. I think one of the things that struck me is that lots of people do want to do something, that do this or that, but they don't. It doesn't strike me. They don't always feel that they can. I mean, do some people come up to you and say, what you've done to decide when you're a teenager that you can set up a school, and then to have the gall or the bravery or the passion or the desire or knowing it's important enough? Do some people say to you, well, that's amazing, and how did you go about it? And find it hard to believe that you could actually go about doing something which is a huge challenge on the other side of the world, but you've never done before?
Well, I realise that it can actually seem quite inaccessible, because I'm really fortunate to be in a position where I'm able to just go and do essentially what I want, and I've been able to push that to living in India and the work which I do. But I don't think that that everybody has to move to India in order to do something which we really care about. And indeed, there are so many people in the UK and around the world who put a huge amount of time and effort into all of the work which they do, and the millions of charities in the UK and the trustees who work for them and all of their volunteers. So I'm inspired as much by them doing that, and I've combined that with my love of travelling and of education as well.
So why India? Again, why India? Because again, you would have had the local knowledge. Presumably, you weren't necessarily born there. Why India? And did you meet challenges? I mean, yourself and your business partner, in terms of going in and to try and help and so on. Because some people say that part of the challenges we've got is the hangover of education being implanted from outside and so on. So tell me how and why.
Right. Well, I think you have to start somewhere with education. I mean, it's very clear to everyone that there's a huge need for better education across the whole world. And for me, it just happened to be that fate took me to India. And also, the person I started charity with, and he has connections in India as well. So it seemed like a great place to start. And so the challenges of sort of giving education there, and sort of the history behind, perhaps how the British came in and they changed the education system within India, then there are some sort of links to that, and people do remember that as well. But I think that ultimately, if what you're doing is listening to people who you're trying to serve and responding to what they're saying to you, and being very attentive to that, then ultimately your actions are going to be in line with what they want, and people are going to notice that and appreciate that and be supportive of it, and that's what we found. So
yeah, and I think that it's interesting what you're saying, because I guess that I think what's fascinating about this for me is that it brings into play lots of issues: education, how we are as a society, the fact that there are all these interlinks. Many of us have links to all sorts of different parts of the planet.
Exactly, and that's something which I'd really like to underline, is that for me this is about learning in my own life and actually being quite selfish in some ways. This isn't some kind of philanthropic thing. I get a huge amount out of this. So by going to India and living in the village and learning the language and staying there, I was able to see a whole side of this one planet which we live on, which I would never normally have been able to do, and I'm privileged to be able to do that. But as a result, then being there, I was able to walk in and visit homes for children who come to our school and meet their parents and meet their brothers and their sisters, and that just gave us a really kind of sensitive and subtle understanding of the needs of those kids, which I think is what maybe sets us apart from other organisations who maybe the trustees only visit their project areas once a year, if that at all, even sort of local organisations as well. And certainly the government inspectors don't go down and spend 2 years living in the village. And I think you've got to start from that point. So what is life like here? And what do they need, and what do people think they need? And then that's your starting point when you're trying to provide education, not just how can I get bums on seats, uniforms on backs, or increase enrollment rates.
Right. One thing that's really struck me is that I think that you've been very hands-on. One thing she told me as insight, you actually like making things. I know you like making things. You were saying you built bench, you're building a boat or something like that as well. And what I like about this project, I think it's interesting, is a lot of it was literally built. I mean, there's footage, and I think I may have touched on this before on your website, of you and others, literally building the school. There's a lot of time that you spend literally on the ground, living in the particular area. A lot of work with people actually about what their actual health needs are and so on. It's real hands-on stuff. It's not, you haven't taken an easy, it's real.
Well, it had to be a learning process for me as well. I can't possibly expect to be able to help someone else learn if I myself don't know what the challenges of learning are as well. And so by building the school, I was able to understand a little bit of what that is. I completely appreciate that at any point in time I could have left. And I'm not sort of stuck, as it were, in a very challenging environment. It gives me a better appreciation of that. And by learning the language, and if you know another language, they say that you get another life, right? Because it gives you a whole new way of thinking. So I can think in terms which are more similar to how people in the area might think as well. And all of these things has helped to kind of enrich my life, but also just make me be able to provide a better service to people which I want to work with.
And presumably
and sharing things.
Right, and presumably in terms of learning about education, learning about the different agencies that you have to work with, what confines you need to work with, but also I think how you've gone about building a charity. I think that I love the story about how you started out and you were not far from here. You would go along the streets where people would be like fundraising and just to get people to fund. It seems you've been very hands-on with everything, including in terms of getting people to support and donate. Are you aware of that, or is it just because needs must? I mean, again, it's quite entrepreneurial. I know that it may not be a word that you might necessarily pick and ascribe to yourself, but can you see that the way that you've gone about things and that Educate for Life has gone about things, I think quite entrepreneurial as well as...
Right, exactly. So this was never about just another charity. There's lots of charities building schools, and not about just another school, but trying to act, by doing it myself, or ourselves rather, then we're able to think, well, this is how we see people doing it, but maybe we can do it in another way. And that gives us an edge where education needs to be done another way in India, because you can't go into every village in India and find a good school. So it's unstructured. So that's why I need to do everything myself as well, because I need to understand every element and try and structure those so that I can then communicate that forward to the next person who comes along and make it easier for them to come in.
And that's what's been interesting then. You have then, from the unstructured and from the creative, then you've been putting structures in place, and I know at the moment you're reviewing the stuff that you're doing and so on. Before we close, I want to touch a little bit on going back to this thing about what is education.
Yeah.
I know we've had a conversation a little bit about Krishnamurti, who touches on this whole thing about education. What for you is education? I remember once you saying that even sometimes that's not the whole question, or the thing about what our starting point often is about schools. What for you is education about? Is it about the things that you're wanting somebody to learn? Is it about enabling somebody there for the rest of their life? What is education, and is it something that's imposed on somebody, or is it something a spark that comes from somebody? Just tell me a little bit about, in your own experience, what is education? It's a very broad question, but any thoughts or feelings about it?
I mean, something which really inspires me is something said by Amartya Sen, and he sort of looks at...
For people who don't know him.
Amartya Sen being Nobel laureate of economics, and he said about development being along the lines of being able to enable people to lead the life that they want to live. And I just love that as a definition, because it is so big. And by making it big, then it means that it's kind of diverse and multidimensional, and it kind of embodies that idea that lives are about more than just like ability to read or inability to read, or whether you've got $2 a day or $2.50 a day, and that like lives are rich and complex. And if in school, where you spend maybe 12, 15 years of your lives, you're not being taught how to balance all these rich, complex elements of life, then you're doing a disservice to that person.
Well, I agree with
and you're
you.
Unempowering.
Right, I agree with you. And as a coach, I mean, that's really dear to my heart, because we learn differently, we have different skills and different abilities. Some people academically, and so on. Some people just have got good memories, so certain types of education is going to suit them.
Right. So that's the other thing, you need to be able to cater to the diverse needs of different children. Everybody's different, like we all know that, so why give a single access to learning through them? So if you've got activities where children can learn through memorization, then great, but also do what they can learn with their hands, or they can learn with their bodies, or they can learn through music, or song, or dance.
And are these all different elements that you explore?
we explore or will be exploring as we try and sort of build up the richness. I look at it as a habitat, and if you have wheat in a field and there's one strain of wheat and you get a pest which can attack that wheat, then the whole lot's going to go. And that's the situation we have now. What we want is tropical rainforests which have a huge species diversity, small things, big things, fat things, thin things, green things, whatever it happens to be. They're all key elements. They're all completely different, but you can't say that one's any more important than another.
Well, I just think that's also, I love that, and I do think it's a lovely metaphor for life. And what do you think, just very briefly before we close, what are the elements that creates that habitat in a way? Because it then brings into play, like, a role of teachers, the role of parents, of us as a community, and so on. What's your observations about that? Because isn't it sometimes, again, when we look at education, it's like responsibility of the school, or it's responsibility of the state, or it's responsibility of the head, or it's a responsibility of that. What is it that best creates that ground is it something that we all need to?
Well, it can seem so complex, but I think at the core of it is if you're actually looking at the child, each child in front of you, and seeing how they respond to however you interact with them, and then of course have like guidelines and supporting tools and documentation and training for people who are doing that with the children to help them be able to look at children that way and respond to their needs. Then ultimately, then you're going to be responsive in a kind of a feedback loop where assessment doesn't come about grading a child, but understanding how to help that child better. And if you always have that in your mind, how can I help this human go where they want to go?
And what I like about that, and just to close, and we probably won't have time to go into much depth, but I like the fact that then that points to this ongoing learning, this thing, this educate for life.
Right, and that's where we come back to, where we come back to the idea of educate for life, where going to school is about learning for life, because that's where you want to apply it. So we teach our children through practical experience and out in the community, because you're learning in real life contexts where you're going to do them in your own life, and that's what it's about, being able to be happy, fulfilled, capable people who can work together to achieve what you want to achieve individually and as a community.
And also I get the feeling that through this kind of what you're doing, it means that everybody, the teachers, parents and so on, are learning and developing, they're involved and they're really engaged and they can reflect. Because sometimes we think that education is something that finishes largely at school, unless we're doing some ongoing education and work, and it all seems abstract rather than this ongoing learning in terms of your own journey. Do you feel as though that's really also important in life, that we're all living beyond just the children, that we're all exploring and learning
and so this kind of feedback loop with the children is about seeing how that child learns to learn, not how you teach that child. So if you can teach someone to learn and you give them sort of tools and strategies and a confidence to do that, then they can go as far as they want as long as they have the right kind of support. But if they're always dependent on the teacher, as is the case now in very kind of learn by rote teaching, then as soon as they're outside of that teaching environment, they're not going to learn anything, and they can only ever know what the teacher imparts to them, rather than go forth and seek knowledge and skills themselves. So it's absolutely about learning, so not when they leave school, but right to the very last day of everybody's lives, and we all keep learning, then I feel that's just an enriching experience.
Well, I think, Ed, Forrest, we'll leave it there. And thank you so much. I thought that's really wonderful, and I think it gives lots of people who are interested in around education, around development and charity, lots of interesting things to kind of think about. So I'm going to leave you to smile at the camera, and I just thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you very much as well.
Thank you.